16th century Venice. The Venetians saw themselves as superior to other Italian cities. They were the greatest commercial sea power of the Mediterranean. They lived in this unique geographic location. They were protected by water, and they controlled sea routes in the Adriatic and East Mediterranean Sea. This made them very wealthy, and of course, they were great patrons of the arts. In the last fourth of the 15th century, Venice emerged as a major artistic center. They had a strong Byzantine heritage, of course, based on their location. Here's Venice right here. And in art, we see a rich patterning of surfaces emphasized by light and color. And that rich patterning is really influenced by that Byzantine heritage. They also had an idealized style. They began using oil paint as a technique by the late 15th century, and it was developed further by 16th century painters in Venice and the surrounding region. The part of northeast Italy ruled by Venice was called the Veneto region. The Venetians were the first Italians to use oils for painting on both wood panel and canvas. Now they ended up using a lot of canvas, and that's because instead of frescoes, and that's because they had a problem with humidities in their walls. Oil paint was well suited for their love for rich color and lighting effects. Giovanni Bellini, who lived about 1430 to 1516, you can read about him in your book. I just bring this image in to show you some of his work because he is influential on two of Venice's major painters of the 16th century. This is his Virgin and Child enthroned with the saints. This is probably his greatest achievement produced during his mature style. And when we say mature style, we mean like late in his life, late in his career, and the early years of the 16th century. His mature style was marked by a grand, simplified, idealized style. Now, like I said, he was influential on two of Venice's major painters of the 16th century, and that was Giorgione and Titian. Giorgione had a very brief career. He was alive from 1475 to 1510, and then he died of the plague. Scholars can only confirm 4 or 5 paintings as entirely by his hand. He worked closely with Titian, that other major Venetian artist of the period, so it's really hard to tell what is whose work. He is known for introducing a new, intriguing pastoral themes known as posies. Posies are painted poems inspired by contemporary literature that revived ancient pastoral poetry. So pastoral poetry basically is poetry written about the countryside and idealizes the countryside. And it paints this picture of luscious landscape and the power of nature. So it's basically a romantic way of looking at the landscape. Now, when this first came popular was in ancient Rome. And this was important because ancient Romans, who lived in Rome, didn't really have access to nature or landscape. They lived in an urban setting. And this type of poetry and imagery like this satisfied their need for nature and landscape. And this was the same for Renaissance Venetians, so people who lived in the city during the Renaissance in Venice. We know that Giorgione studied with Bellini, the guy that we just looked at in the last slide, and he was probably, or he might have been inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's lighting system as well, and his mysterious, intensely studied landscapes. So remember how when we looked at the Mona Lisa, she had this imagined landscape behind her. We sort of think that maybe Giorgione was looking at something like that when he created this work. This is his most famous work, and it's the Tempest. It's oil on canvas. It was created about 1506. It is over 2.5 by 1 feet. It was painted shortly before his death. Now, art historians are baffled about what's going on here. There's much debate about it. It's really not something that we saw before in the Renaissance. So we think it's an example of these posy paintings, these landscape idealized scenes of the countryside. Perhaps it is exploring the imagination and the sensual rather than some historical, religious, or mythological theme. We kind of saw something a little bit similar when we were looking at Botticelli. So when he does the Primavera, remember, he's not really focusing on one story. Instead, what he's doing is he's combining different elements of mythology into one image. It's not really forming a story, it's just kind of making a thematic statement. So maybe that's what he's doing here. We're just not really sure. Art historians see him as being really ahead of his time, like foreshadowing art way later. Now, what is going on? Well, at the right, we see a woman who is seated on the ground. She's nude except for a white cloth, and she is nursing a baby. Now, the nudity seems more maternal rather than erotic, so that really contrasts with Botticelli's work, right? Like with the Birth of Venus. That was definitely meant to be erotic, and of course, this does not seem to be meant to be erotic. Across the spring, in a German mercenary soldier's uniform, we see a man, and he is looking at the woman. Now, some x-rays show, there's an x-ray that was completed on this, and it shows that originally a second woman would have been in this image. There is a spring that connects the foreground to the background, and it feeds the lake in the middle. So here we go, and here's the lake in the middle here. He actually uses some really loose brushwork through here. And that's kind of interesting and sort of foreshadows some techniques maybe used in the Baroque period later. Same thing here. He does use some loose brushwork in this area right here. The lake is surrounded by houses which go off into the distance. You can see that through here. And the sky is filled with a storm. We've got these dark clouds and these like lightning striking. Although I have heard some people interpret that instead of lightning as like a sun through the clouds. But I think it's meant to be lightning, especially with this dark cloud going on over here. But it's meant to show us the power of nature. It's an intense study of nature. But unlike the Northerners, who remember were trying to recreate or reconstruct nature, Giorgione is more interested in the essence and power of nature rather than every single detail. And that's why he's using this kind of loose brushwork here and in the clouds as well. He does a great work using loose brushwork to create the texture of the clouds. This really makes landscape, this image makes landscape central to the composition. And this is quite unusual. It marks a new trend in painting. Now, contemporary viewers might not have been as intrigued as we are. We see this and we're like, well, what is going on? It's this landscape, which, if I'm a Renaissance person, I haven't really seen that much before. And we really haven't talked about it that much in this class. So I see a landscape. I see this woman nursing, hanging out in the landscape nursing. And then I have this German mercenary soldier watching her, perhaps, like a creeper. I don't know what he's doing. But, so it really doesn't seem to be any connection. It doesn't seem to be making sense. We're really intrigued by it because of that mystery, because we don't know what's happening. But a 1530 viewer, somebody who lived in the 1530s and saw this painting, described it as a small landscape painting with a storm and a gypsy woman and a soldier. So to them, I guess it was pretty straightforward, but we're not sure. Most of Giorgione's other works are traditional subjects that he produced on commission for clients, like portraits and altarpieces, and he also painted the exterior of Venetian buildings. But this one we're not sure if there was a patron, so we just don't really have a lot of information about it, but that just makes it kind of more fun to look at. This seems like one of those paintings that you would have been given in grade school and like, well, I mean, maybe not with the nursing mom there. That might have been like PC for the grade school, but you would have been given this image to like write about and like make up a story about. I don't know if you guys ever did that, but I always thought that was lots of fun. A painting with a similar basis in poesy, poetry is the pastoral concert or allegory on the invention of pastoral poetry. And it is almost 3.5 feet by 4.5 feet. It was created in 1510, and it's oil on canvas. Now, the artist of this painting is actually up for debate. Most scholars think that it was Titian, so he's the other like big painter of the Venice in the 16th century. Other scholars think that it was Giorgione. The careers of these two artists really intertwined until Giorgione's death. Titian worked as Giorgione's assistant, and then they collaborated on several projects. After Giorgione's death, Titian completed several of the paintings that they had been working on together, and this might have been one of them. So it's a very similar looking theme to The Tempest. It has this ambiguous subject matter. They both share this idyllic, fertile landscape. The pastoral concert is more dominated by figures than The Tempest. It makes us think that Titian did play a big role in it because he is really into the depiction of figures, whereas we can see that in this work, which is supposedly Giorgione, really the landscape is the central theme. But here, these figures definitely dominate the foreground of the scene. He depicts these two women here, and they're kind of very a little bit curvy, maybe doughy female figures, soft figures. This was really the ideal of the time. So it's an idealized figure. The figures are bathed in a golden hazy light, sort of like a soft focus, like the light of the late afternoon. Now your book says that the figures seem to be secondary. Perhaps, but maybe they look more juxtaposed on the landscape. Now this could show a collaboration of two artists. Maybe, this is just theory here, maybe Giorgione painted the background and then Titian added these later. Maybe the patron decided he didn't want a landscape and so then they added the figures later. We are not sure. We do see, like, it does seem like it's two scenes. Like, so we have this whole background of the landscape. We have this little scene going over here with maybe a shepherd, and then we have these guys in the foreground. So they really do seem like that they were perhaps added later. We see these two men here, and this one is an aristocratic musician, and he is wearing rich red silks. And this guy over here is a barefoot singing peasant in homespun cloth. They interact, as they definitely would not have in real life. So again, it's that idealized scene. They are absorbed in each other and their music, and they really seem to ignore the women. The women seem to really, like, she has a kind of flute type instrument here, but they don't seem to be interested in what the women are doing at all. So she's playing this musical instrument, and this woman is pouring water into a well, which really seems very counterproductive to me. The white drapery on the women enhances their nudity rather than hiding it, just like we saw in Giorgione's Tempest. In the middle ground, we see that shepherd and his sheep over here. And the painting does evoke a mood of poetry, idealizing rural life, and really recalling that ancient Roman pastoral poetry. It could be an allegory of the invention of poetry, or this particular type of poetry. We do know this painting is going to be very influential on later paintings, particularly Manet in the 19th century. So when we get to the 19th century and we see Manet, think about this and see if you can kind of think of some comparisons there.